Hey all, welcome back to another classic Mike Reads the World book review, I guess. I never was quite sure whether to call these reviews or not, but today I'll be discussing two Kyrgyz classic, well, one's a novel and one is a oral epic, and the novel I have finished. The oral epic I am still in the process of understanding and reading, and so I'm going to talk about The Day Lasts More Than 100 Years by Chingiz Aitmatov first. Doing a little bit of thinking, I kind of, figured, well, I still have the whole 1001 Nights of Reading the World thing going on. I've taken the last 2 weeks to really, almost 2 weeks since finishing the Magic Mountain essay to really just read whatever I want, and it's been fun to go back into other works that I've read throughout this project that I've really wanted to go back to, and I'm going to continue kind of making that my main focus, but I think there still is a handful of books that I selected for my Read Around the World project that I do want to talk about or read and talk about in their own videos. So as long as the 1001 excuse me, Nights of Reading the World continues to the date that I've put on it, I will continue to do these videos and perhaps beyond, who knows, but I still have it in my head that this is 1001 Nights of Reading the World, and so I'm still pushed to continue exploring some of these books that I've collected, at least for a short time. So, without further ado, let's continue with The Day Lasts More Than 100 Years by Chingiz Aitmatov. This is actually, so far, I think the most memorable book from the Central Asian region that I've read for a number of reasons. I don't want to necessarily say the best, but I mean, it's up there, but it's just one of the most unique, one of the most standout, because it has elements of science fiction and sort of mythological fantasy worked in, but the main basis of the story is you have this man, Yedigi. Of course, all my pronunciations will be rough on this one. Who Yedigi he lives in this area of the steppe where a railway passes through, and this kind of calls back to that book, The Railway, that I read a long time for Uzbekistan, and this image has now been reinforced for me of these sort of former Soviet bloc Central Asian countries just kind of being these, and I suppose this goes back many centuries to these countries, these lands being sort of a passing through of the Silk Road, and then in Soviet times being kind of just a railway, or multiple railways cutting right through them, and then spokes coming off of those. And so anyway, Yedigi lives in kind of a relatively remote area, but it is connected to the railway, and he's kind of off on one of the spokes, and his friend, one of his only friends in the village, dies, and so he is trying to fulfill this friend's last wishes to bury him in a certain cemetery that has mythological sort of cultural meaning to this area and to him. And so he's trying to bury his friend, and that's like the main action of the present day story. At the same time, he sees a space rocket launching off in the distance. And this is kind of just a hint at the sort of science fiction separate story, parallel story that's going to be happening alongside this. And as Yedigi is trying to get his friend to the cemetery and bury on his, going along with his black Bactrian camel, which is also a very unique and almost an important character in itself. He's thinking about and remembering all these times he's had in his life, starting out in a town on the Aral Sea, I believe it is, a port town, and then going to the interior of the steppe. How he meets his wife, his some of his other friends that he gets to meet in this village that he eventually gets transferred to. He and some of his friends all have experience in the war, in World War II. There's some discussion about that. So there's some connection to fighting in the Soviet army in World War II that people from Kyrgyzstan. Actually, this book is actually taking place in Kazakhstan for the most part. Kazakhstan. So this is another thing with these Central Asian countries. When you find books for them, it's often very hard to put one author or book to a specific country. Like here we have a Kyrgyz Russian writer writing about a story in Kazakhstan. And then I've also had, a guy from Tajikistan writing about Uzbekistan, and Uzbekistan writing whatever. When you start looking up books for these countries, you just get all this crossover, and it starts to get very hard to draw the lines. And I honestly don't know if I have a single book that I've assigned to a Central Asian country that is like a solid, that definitely belongs with that country, and some of them were really quite stretches. So most of it takes place in Kazakhstan, but there's a lot, and as you read these books, you realize there are a lot of similar features between these countries, like the railway, the steppe life, that there is this sort of common culture that transcends the arbitrary regional divisions that that we get in sort of Soviet colonialism or modern day nation state forming as a result of that. So it's really interesting stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about the sci-fi aspect of this. In the day lasts more than 100 years, you can see on this amazing cover, it's got the rocket and the bird. Those are both symbols that'll come up, the man on his camel. And so we get basically this Soviet-American joint space mission that is going out to some pretty far reaches of our solar system, it seems like, supposedly to explore a planet. If I'm remembering right, the planet they're trying to explore actually doesn't become the main focus. It's some transmissions that the two cosmonauts who are on board this joint space station get from far out in the galaxy. And it turns out to be from this alien planet, this civilized alien civilization, who is, war is unknown to them, but they do have their environmental problems on their planets. And the whole description of their planet, when we eventually get it, is very creative, very interesting. But what's even more interesting, and I think is probably really telling about our nature and the times of the Cold War, is how humans react, how we react, and the governments of these countries react to learning about this civilization and these cosmonauts who basically get willingly kidnapped or willingly taken to the alien planet across the galaxy and start sending transmissions back. So I don't know. I guess that would be a spoiler to say how we react, but I don't really think so. It's again one of those books that it just feels hard to spoil. If you're interested in this, you'll read it. If not, but I will give a light spoiler here, so continue watching at your own risk. But it's basically the reaction of the Soviet and American governments and the governments of the Earth to getting this transmission that there's this highly civilized, alien life that is way more technologically advanced, knows no war, is to say, we don't want anything to do with them. We're not ready for this alien civilization that knows way better than we do how to run a planet or a society or travel across the galaxy. We're not ready. It's almost like a mixture of shame and But then also the idea that you don't want to become better as a species is also a shameful thing, but they're doing it kind of out of shame and possibly out of personal interest because, well, it's just a very interesting situation that basically the governments of Earth say we want nothing to do with this alien civilization, and they set up a big defense force for just in case this civilization tries to come. It's very Cold War thinking, right? And so so they shut off communication and set up a defense force. Anyway, so that's the sci-fi aspect of it. There's also probably the most actually interesting part of the whole book to me was this invented myth of the Mankurt. Now, I don't know if the tribe that does this is invented, but this practice of taking, basically they would capture slaves and then put them through this horrific torture in order to make them lose their memory. And so once they've lost their memory, there's this tale about one that can't even recognize his own mother who goes looking for him. And there's a tragic ending to that whole story, which is basically the founding of the cemetery in which our main character, Yedegi, throughout all his memories and things, is trying to bury his friend. So yeah, that was a really, really interesting story because just I guess sort of the macabre, it's always these macabre things in books are always really memorable, but also a lot of the most terrifying things in literature, and this is something I'm considering doing a future essay on around this theme. A lot of the most terrifying things in literature are about losing our memory or being disconnected completely from the person we think we are. And I find that a really compelling theme in book after book, and some of the scariest monsters or mythological creatures have to do with that loss of memory and loss of identity, being unable to recognize your own loved ones, sort of thing. The El Zabo in Gene Wolfe, for example, is a great example of that. That's not really myth, but more recent science fiction example. So the science fiction and fantasy elements do not dominate this book. They are kind of like parallel stories in the past and present that will eventually loosely connect to our main character. And I'm not sure I've understood completely how they connect. It's almost it's one of those books that makes me suspect that on a reread I might discover something really mind-blowing, but I'm not sure. There were parts of the book that I found somewhat tedious, especially this going back, like as Yedegi is traveling to the cemetery, he's thinking back on his memories, and sometimes those sorts of books that are told mainly through memories and parallel stories while you have a present story that's really interesting can wear me down a bit. It's not always an easy narrative style to pull off, and it's not always my favorite. But that being said, I do think this is a book worth reading, and one of, for me, the top books of the Central Asian region that I've read. I would read something else by Aitmatov for sure if given the opportunity. I don't know that I would seek it out specifically. We'll see. But yeah, I think that, and one more thing about the Mankurt I wanted to say, this sort of like fictional sort of, removing the memory of slaves type of technique. It's really important when you're reading books to always be critical about what is actually invented by the author and what's not, because I might have, without doing a little bit of, Google searching, thought that the Mankurt was like a real thing that, sometimes with really realist novels, you have to be aware that sometimes the author does just make things up, and it seems obvious, but sometimes when you're reading these books, you can kind of forget to have that critical outlook, and then maybe you'll go into future reading like this Memorial Feast for Kokotoy Khan, nice transition here, where you have some very brutal sort of fights and kind of from our perspective, a very different way of life, and mix in your mind sort of this false belief about some barbarity that took place with the reality of the culture. And even this, the epic of Kokotoy Khan, or the memorial feast of Kokotoy Khan, is part of a larger epic called the Epic of Manas. But this is I believe, the only thing available in English. I don't believe we have the full Epic of Manas in English. So, and this is only from 2014, just a part of it. So it's really I think it's a work in progress, and we are kind of living just now in the era where this Epic of Manas is starting to come out, this famous Kyrgyz epic. So this is just a part of that, but one of the most important parts. And it's meant to be an oral storytelling device translated from Kyrgyz. The poetry of this, so far that I am reading, is not really coming across. It is, I do find it a bit dry and a bit difficult to get through, and kind of like the epic of Didi Korkut, a little just difficult, because you get these long lists of names, you get so many characters and so many places thrown out very quickly, and from chapter to chapter, and it's very difficult to, when you're reading it, you can't possibly remember all this. And I guess this was a frustration I had with The Railway, which is a more modern book from Uzbekistan by Ismailov, I think is the author, and I had difficulty with that book too, because you had 130 characters in a 260-page book, but that is in kind of the tradition of the oral epics of this area, and it's hard as the reader to not familiar with these culture, not familiar with these names and places, to know what's important, to know what the through lines of the story is. It almost feels like this is a very different mentality about storytelling and how to tell a story, a very different aesthetic quality and vision, and that is something that there's a little bit of cultural relativism to how to tell a story here. So it's difficult. I'm trying to work my way through it, but basically the leader of a tribe dies, and then his son is calling everybody together to a big feast, and at this feast there's going to be tournaments, some fights are going to break out, and the hero Manas of the entire epic is kind of going to emerge and play a big role in this scene. So in this part of the epic. So I just all I'm saying right now is what I know from kind of the introduction in the first few chapters that I've read, and then kind of skimming other parts of it. I can't say how much more I'm going to attempt to break through this one. I'm kind of more tempted to move on to the secret history of the Mongols, where at least I have some basis of understanding of the Genghis Khan story from various sources when I was younger and interested in that history. So that might be a better place to start. That's one thing I have to say, that finding a synthesis between the historic events of these Central Asian countries is not something I'm really grasping yet. I'm grasping these common symbols, the way of steppe life, the isolation, but not, the fact that it's isolated but connected. It was part of the Silk Road, and it was part of the Soviet railways, and it's still all connected, I imagine, in some way today. But it's what isolates one in the steppes is the distance and the way that the culture seems so particularly different, while still being a bridge between, China and the Middle East, or what's the better word? Southwest Asia, yeah. So it acts as a bridge, but it is also its own culture and its own nucleus, and that part that is its nucleus is what makes it isolated, the cultural aspect. So I've done my best to communicate what I can about The Day Lasts More Than 100 Years by Chingiz Aitmatov. Very interesting book, with Another, it's also one of those books with a somewhat ambiguous ending, which I always like. Not a perfect book, not one of my favorites I've ever read, from the entire world, but definitely a favorite of the region, and one that's worthwhile, I think, if you're interested in that region, and if you're interested in that sort of like ambient steppe climate and myth, kind of the myth that forms around that, and some of the possibilities. I think this book has a lot of amazing possibilities for the writer interested in this region and those cultures, which I think, I wouldn't be surprised if like Ismailov in the railway was inspired by this book. I almost would certainly think that was an influence for Ismailov. So, and then of course the memorial feast for Kokotoy Khan. So, thanks for watching. Another couple reviews for Kyrgyzstan, 2 Kyrgyz classics, and we'll see you next time on Mike Reads the World. I'm still putting most of my focus into thinking about, essays in the future, rereading what I want, and just whenever I'm inspired, we'll do one of these reviews for at least as long as the 1001 Nights of Reading the World continues, until the end of September of next year. So, thanks again. We'll see you next time.